My name is Camille Dorsey. I'm 34 years old, a biomedical engineer, and the co-founder of Neural Track Systems, a company I helped build from my mother's final hospital bed. We started with one prototype and a single belief: that memory loss shouldn't steal a person's dignity. 12 years, 5 patents, and $60 million in valuation later. I thought I was finally stepping into the legacy I'd sacrificed everything for. But on the night I stood beneath the spotlight, accepting our biggest industry award, my father made a decision that rewrote my place in the company and in our family. I stood beneath the spotlights, the engraved glass award in my hands catching a prism of light. "On behalf of Neural Track Systems," I said into the mic, "we are honored to accept this year's Breakthrough MedTech Award." The crowd applauded, and for a moment, all the late nights, clinical trials, and patent rejections melted into pure, unfiltered pride. I searched for my father's face in the crowd: Russell Dorsey, co-founder, and until now, the company's steady hands. He gave me a proud nod, glass of champagne in hand. Griffin, my older brother, stood beside him, clapping politely. He looked sharp tonight, clean-shaven, tailored suit, but he had nothing to do with this milestone. Neural Track was born from my mother's decline, my father's desperation, and my engineering obsession. Griffin had been in Bali when I coded the first prototype on Mom's hospice nights. Back at our table, the mood was celebratory. Investors toasted, someone ordered more wine, and Dad stood to tap his glass. "I want to share a personal announcement," he said, drawing smiles of curiosity. "Tonight isn't just about Neural Track's success, it's about transition. I've decided to step down as CEO." I froze. "And I'm proud to introduce the company's next leader, Griffin Dorsey." The room clapped. I didn't. My body didn't move. I looked at Griffin. He smiled sheepishly, like he knew this was absurd, but not absurd enough to refuse. Later, in a hallway lined with sponsor logos, I cornered Dad. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. He sighed. "Griffin's been shadowing me for 6 months. We wanted to make sure he was ready." 6 months? I blinked. "You kept that from me?" "We needed to prepare quietly. You were focused on product. This was strategy." But I was more than product. I was this company's engine. And suddenly, I wasn't even in the driver's seat. I walked back into the ballroom, applause still echoing faintly, but it no longer felt like mine. By Monday morning, the applause from the awards gala had faded, but the aftershock hadn't. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. Like always, I badged in, nodded to the front desk, and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, needing a sense of normalcy. But when I reached my desk, my screen greeted me with a sterile message: "Access denied. Contact administrator." I blinked. Tried again. Same result. Assuming a system error. I opened my personal laptop and pulled up the GitHub repository. A red banner blinked across the top. "You no longer have permission to access this project." I stared, heart thudding, as the realization settled over me like a frost. My name was being erased. In the kitchen, I bumped into Ray, one of our designers. He gave me an awkward smile. "Hey, check out the new marketing draft yet?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I hadn't, but I would. I walked down to the creative wing, Griffin's new domain, apparently, and grabbed a sample brochure from the layout table. There it was, a full-page photo of Griffin in a lab coat, arms crossed, under the headline, "A Founder's Vision, Redefining Cognitive Recovery." Founder's Vision? I flipped to the inside page, scanning for my name. Nothing, no quote, no mention. What I did find was worse. Our old tagline, "Inspired by Memory Care," was gone, replaced with "Optimize," "Accelerate," "Disrupt." Disrupt. As if we were building crypto wallets, not restoring human memory. Suddenly, I noticed something else. The framed portrait of my mother, which had hung in the hallway since the company's founding, was missing. The hook was still there, just empty. My fingers curled around the edge of the brochure. I stormed into the conference room, now labeled the Griffin Dorsey Strategy Suite, and dropped the brochure on the table. It was just after 8 o'clock, and the floor was quiet. I didn't need an audience for what I felt. What I felt wasn't just anger. It was betrayal lined with shame. I had let this happen. I believed building the best product would protect my place. I was wrong. Back at my desk, I checked my inbox. A familiar name caught my eye. An internal email from the marketing lead, apparently meant for Griffin, but accidentally CC'd to me, confirming the revised brand deck and removal of all language referencing memory care or emotional narrative. Griffin wants a clean pivot, no sentiment, no legacy talk, just metrics. I didn't breathe for a few seconds. No sentiment, no legacy, no mom, no me. That night, I drove home in silence. My fingers never left the steering wheel. Rage had found its rhythm inside me, but it was a quiet, patient kind. The kind that didn't explode, the kind that built. And I was done being erased. I didn't sleep the night I got that email. The phrase, no sentiment, no legacy, kept playing on a loop in my head, like an insult wearing a tailored suit, by 5:15 a.m. I was at the kitchen table with a cold mug of coffee and an old name scribbled on a sticky note. Harlan Day. Harlan had been my startup attorney 10 years ago, back when NeuralTrack was nothing more than a sketch diagram and a storage unit filled with circuit boards. He was sharp, discreet, and just paranoid enough to draft ownership paperwork with firewalls embedded in firewalls. I found his office number buried in an old email thread and called just after 8 o'clock. He picked up on the third ring. "Camille Dorsey," he said warmly, before I could even introduce myself. "It's been too long. You building another miracle, or cleaning up someone else's mess?" "Both," I said. "I need a copy of the original IP filings, the core system, the neuroadaptive mapping software, everything we registered back in 2014. "Still under your name," he replied instantly. "You never transferred those rights." I paused, unsure I heard correctly. "Wait, what?" He chuckled. "You were so wary of early-stage investors taking over that you asked me to file everything personally. We listed NeuralTrack as a licensee, not the owner. You've retained full authorship and control over the core IP all along." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of that truth settling over me like a thunderclap. For years, I'd assumed, no, accepted, that as the company grew. Those rights had been absorbed into the entity we built. But I was wrong. I hadn't just built the engine. I still owned it. "Camille?" Harlan's voice pulled me back. "If someone's trying to push you out, you've got leverage, serious leverage." I ended the call with his promise to send all legal documents by end of day. My hands trembled as I opened a new file on my laptop. Contingency Plan A. By 9:30, the contracts were sitting in my inbox. I scrolled through the language, lines I remembered drafting with Harlan on a whiteboard, still smudged with my mother's handwriting in the corner. She'd written, "Protect what matters," in blue ink. We never erased it. The clause was simple. Licensee retains right to operate said intellectual property under condition of alignment with mission, as defined in Attachment B. I opened Attachment B. There it was, in my own words. To provide cognitive restoration rooted in dignity, especially for those impacted by memory loss conditions. Griffin had erased that mission, and by doing so, invalidated their license to use what I'd created. I stared at the screen. My breath came slow. They hadn't just pushed me out of the company. They'd stepped off the legal cliff without even realizing it. And I was holding the ground they were standing on. The first thing I noticed Tuesday morning was that my name had vanished. I hadn't been checking the company website regularly. Too raw. Too soon. But a recruiter friend texted me, "Hey, just saw Neural Track's leadership page. Thought you were still with them?" I clicked the link. Griffin's face greeted me at the top. Founder and visionary CEO. The caption read. Below that, 3 department heads I barely knew had replaced titles I'd helped build from scratch. There was no mention of me, no co-founder, no chief engineer, not even a special thanks. I stared at the screen until my coffee went cold, still hoping this was a miscommunication. I drove to the office, the same one where I'd spent 10 years building algorithms beside my father. The same one where Mom's old rocking chair used to sit beside my desk, back when I couldn't afford a proper chair. I swiped my keycard. Nothing. The red light blinked twice. No access granted. I pressed the buzzer. Reception picked up. Hesitant. Camille, I was told to have you wait downstairs until HR comes down. Do you want coffee? No. I didn't want coffee. I wanted my company back. 20 minutes later, Rhonda from HR handed me a neutral-colored folder and offered me that soft corporate smile used for firings and funerals. Inside was a revised consultancy agreement. I would retain the title of Legacy Advisor, with no executive access, no decision-making authority, and limited hours. There was also a fresh NDA to sign, tighter than the first one I'd drafted with our lawyer a decade ago. I didn't say a word. I just closed the folder and left. In the lobby, someone touched my arm gently. Camille? I turned. It was Ben Nguyen, a junior systems engineer I'd mentored during his internship. He looked uneasy. I shouldn't be talking to you, he muttered, eyes darting around. Then he slipped a small USB drive into my coat pocket. I thought you should hear it, he whispered. Griffin tried pitching the investors last week. It didn't go well. Then he walked away. That night, in the safety of my apartment. I listened. The recording was painful. Griffin stammered through technical specs, mispronounced half the acronyms, and froze when asked about system latency and memory recall models. At one point, an investor asked, "Wasn't this Camille's area?" Griffin changed the subject. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The next morning, I got a single text from Ben. "They let me go this morning. No explanation. But I owe you that much. You taught me more in 6 months than Griffin ever could in a lifetime." I stared at the message, heart cracking in ways I hadn't expected. They weren't just erasing me, they were punishing anyone who remembered I existed. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just hurt. I was quietly, systematically being silenced by Thursday morning. I had convinced myself it was just protocol. There was a product trial scheduled, an internal field test I'd designed 6 months ago before Griffin was ever part of the picture. The update involved new neuromapping overlays calibrated specifically for long-term memory restoration. It wasn't perfect yet. It needed my oversight. I arrived at 9:00 a.m., wearing my badge and carrying a field notebook. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Hi, Camille," she said carefully. "You're not on the access list." I blinked. "What? I can't issue a badge without executive approval. Do you want to wait while I page Mr. Dorsey?" I felt heat climb up my neck. Mr. Dorsey. As if that title didn't belong to my father for the past decade. As if Griffin hadn't just stumbled into it 3 weeks ago. "No," I said quietly. "I'll wait outside." I sat in the atrium like a guest in the house I helped build, watching junior engineers and product leads walk past me. Some too polite to meet my eyes, others just confused. After 30 minutes, the door buzzed open. A woman in a sleek navy blazer, someone I didn't recognize, smiled briskly. "Camille, right? I'm Heather. I'll escort you to the observation room." Observation room. As in, not the lab. As in, not the team. I followed in silence as she led me past the conference glass, where the trial was already underway. My algorithm flickered on the screen, running smoothly. My overlay, my decision tree logic. But the display said, Neural Track Cognitive Suite V2.0, presented by Griffin Dorsey. Then it got worse. Griffin stood confidently at the head of the table. On the screen behind him was the prototype, my prototype, but now it bore a new logo, a garish update I hadn't approved, slapped over my mother's initials in the original etching. He was calling it Next Mind, like it was his idea. Like he'd lived those nights by Mom's bedside, recording every memory she could still articulate. I didn't stay. I walked out quietly, past the espresso bar they'd installed in the new lobby, past a team photo I wasn't in. When I got home, I found an email waiting. Subject line, question RE. IP rights. The sender was one of our early investors, someone who hadn't spoken to me in over a year. Camille, there's a rumor going around that you no longer control the core IP. Is that true? Because if you still do, I'd rather talk to you than to them. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were cold. My jaw clenched. They'd taken my voice, my credit, even my presence. But now someone was asking the right question. Not, is she gone? But, is she still the one who matters? And suddenly, the answer felt very, very clear. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving town. I just drove. The old house on Cypress Ridge sat half forgotten at the edge of a pine grove, its shutters weathered. The mailbox rusted shut. No one had lived there since Mom passed, and yet everything about it still felt like her. Quiet, persistent, untouched. I parked in the gravel driveway and unlocked the back door using the key she always hid behind the planter. The air inside smelled like dust and cedar. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I knew where I was going. The upstairs bedroom, hers, still had the green dresser she used as a storage cabinet. I knelt, opened the bottom drawer, and there it was, the lockbox. I set it on the bed. The key was taped underneath, just where I'd left it 6 years ago. Inside were layers of paper and memory, the original napkin sketch of the interface, a dog-eared patent draft with my scribbled equations in the margins, 3 prototypes in early acrylic casing, and her old notebook, the one with the lavender cover. I opened the notebook gently. Most of it was filled with her observations, things she'd written as her mind began to falter. Page after page of half-remembered names, emotional bursts, poems without form, but near the center, in cleaner handwriting. She had written, Camille's brain saves others. I just hope no one tries to steal it from her. My fingers froze. I reread that line 4 times. It wasn't poetic. It was prophetic. Griffin hadn't just stolen a company. He was trying to rebrand my mind. My mother's vision, our legacy. By 4:00 p.m., I was back at the dining table, laptop open, files from the lockbox spread around me like forensic evidence. No team, no whiteboards. Just me and the raw blueprints that had once lived only in my head. I pulled up a blank project folder and renamed it NOVA, Neural Optimization via Visual Algorithm. It was a name my mother had once said, half-jokingly, back when I'd explained to her how I'd mapped visual sequences to stabilize memory retention. Call it NOVA, she said, like a star exploding so bright it resets itself. At the time, I'd laughed. Now, I typed it in without hesitation. Nova would be smaller, sleeker, decentralized, and it would be mine, free of Griffin's investors, my father's indecision, and every consultant who once thought I was too technical to lead. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had weight. It burned calories, took oxygen. This was colder, focused, simple. They had stripped me of access. Now I would strip them of dependence. And when Nova launched, they wouldn't just lose control of the system, They would lose the illusion that they'd ever created it in the first place. By the time the letter was ready, I had rehearsed the moment 100 times in my head, but when I finally hit send, I felt nothing, no triumph, no rage, just a silence so complete it felt engineered. At 8 a.m., I emailed NeuralTrack's legal department a certified withdrawal notice. The subject line was clear: immediate revocation of patent licensing agreement. File, Sir NTK, 14 Cam, 0001. The message was only 4 paragraphs long. I kept the tone professional, even clinical. They had breached the original licensing terms, specifically the clause about mission alignment, the very clause I'd rediscovered with Harlan weeks earlier. They had stripped memory care from their branding. They had violated the ethos the technology was built on. They had nullified their own license. Therefore, effective immediately, the right to use, update, or distribute the core algorithm would be rescinded. The letter included one final technical line: all active builds of Neural Map Core v1.0 and v1.1 will cease receiving encrypted key-based updates 14 calendar days from receipt of this notice, which meant this: in 2 weeks. All active NeuralTrack devices still running on my framework would enter legacy lockout mode. No patches, no security updates, no neural calibration refinements, and no way to reverse it without my biometric encryption. They would either need to rebuild from scratch or negotiate, and I wasn't interested in either. I didn't post a press release. I didn't go on social media. I let the silence work for me. But by 10:30 a.m., the ripple had already begun. Investors started calling. 3 different news outlets sent anonymous inquiries. One headline popped up on a medical tech blog before noon: NeuralTrack faces licensing crisis over core IP. CEO unavailable for comment. At noon sharp, I made one announcement, brief, purposeful, on the Nova microsite. Nova, a non-profit initiative for memory rehabilitation technologies, has launched in partnership with Colorado Regional Hospitals and 3 community care clinics. No glossy logos. No CEO portrait. Just a line at the bottom. Founded by Camille Dorsey. And then I went back to work. I wasn't planning a product launch or chasing venture capital. I wasn't trying to compete. I was simply removing the scaffolding from a house that had forgotten who built it. That evening, Russell called. I watched the phone ring out. He called again at 6 p.m. Then came the message: Camille, I think we need to talk. This could really damage Griffin's future. Maybe yours too. Please, just call me. But he was wrong. It wasn't about damaging anyone. It was about clarity, boundary, consequence. And the scariest thing for them wasn't that I had acted. It was that I had done it quietly, with precision, without emotion. Because the moment I stopped needing their approval, I became the one they could no longer predict. The first tremor came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 5 days after the license revocation. Stockholders started calling emergency meetings. Investors, once eager to post selfies with Griffin at tech expos, now demanded written assurance that NeuralTrack's infrastructure was legally intact. There was none, because there was no license. By Wednesday, 2 hospital groups pulled out of upcoming trials. One investor tweeted, NeuralTrack's leadership needs to clarify who owns the core tech, fast. And by Friday, the headlines were impossible to ignore. Griffin Dorsey faces licensing crisis. Was IP ever in his name? I watched it unfold like watching a house slowly lose electricity. First the lights, then the heat, then the sound. Griffin tried to control the narrative. He scheduled a press conference, stood under fluorescent lights in a borrowed auditorium, lips stretched in a hollow smile. He opened with big words: growth, adaptation, next-gen pivot. But the questions came hard. Who owns the base algorithm? Why hasn't Camille Dorsey responded? Are NeuralTrack devices still secure? He dodged. He sweat. He called it a transitional bump, but the room smelled of decay. Afterward, I received a text from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Lena, a senior R&D specialist who once worked side by side with me. They let us go today. Half the team, budget slashed. I lost my badge before I even packed my desk. 2 minutes later, she sent another. I cried in the stairwell, not because of the job, but because you were the only real leader here. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, just stared at the screen until the words blurred. I had wanted this collapse, but I hadn't wanted the wreckage to crush people like Lena. Still, the foundation had to break for anything real to rise. That same afternoon, I received an unexpected email from the Department of Public Health. They had followed the NOVA announcement. They were launching a statewide initiative for cognitive recovery in underserved clinics, and they wanted NOVA as the technical lead. I reread the message twice. It wasn't just a partnership, it was a signal. The people who mattered had noticed, and they weren't looking at Griffin anymore. I closed the laptop slowly, the light from the window casting long shadows across my desk. I had torn down a structure I once helped build, and in the ruins, something better was beginning. It was nearly 4:00 p.m. when I heard the knock. Not the usual buzz of a scheduled guest, a slow, deliberate knock, like someone asking to enter a place they no longer belonged. I opened the office door to find Russell, my father, standing in a charcoal suit that didn't quite hide the lines of fatigue etched into his face. His tie was crooked. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Camille," he said, voice worn. "May I come in?" I stepped aside silently. He looked around the Nova workspace, sunlight filtering through clean glass. A single prototype on the display table. No plaques, no portraits, just function. "I need to talk to you about Neural Track," he began. "They're in serious trouble. Griffin's made questionable deals, equipment leasing contracts that shouldn't have been signed. They're down to 8 days of operating funds." I said nothing. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. "We're hoping you'll consider transferring back the IP license, or at least leasing it, just to stabilize the brand, keep the Dorsey name from collapsing." That word, name, cut deeper than he knew. I walked to the corner cabinet and opened it slowly. From inside, I retrieved a small glass case, housing the first prototype I had built for Mom. The shell was scratched, the wiring exposed, but the initials carved into the base were clear. MDD, Margaret Diane Dorsey. I set the case gently on the table between us. "You remember this, don't you?" I asked, voice even. "The one we made for her, together." His face softened. "Of course. That was ours, wasn't it?" He nodded. "Yes." I met his eyes, my voice tightening. "Then why did you give the next one away?" Russell swallowed. The air between us felt heavier than any contract. "I thought Griffin needed a chance. I thought you'd understand." "I did," I said, "until you decided he deserved what I built without ever earning it." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand. "This," I gestured around the room, "isn't revenge. It's reclamation. You can't ask me to protect the family name when the family didn't protect me." He stood there, folder still in hand, but no argument left. After a long pause, he simply said, "I didn't see it clearly until now." I nodded. "Then consider that a beginning, not a bargain." And I left him there, standing beneath the name he once handed away, now watching as I reclaimed it, piece by unshakable piece. It was just after 10:00 a.m. when I stepped onto the small stage at the Colorado State Health Center. No spotlight, no dramatic reveal, just a room filled with clinic directors, public health officials, and people who believed in quiet, steady change. Nova had officially signed a statewide partnership, Our technology would support over 30 community memory care programs. No investors, no noise, just the work. As I adjusted the mic, a reporter from the back raised her hand. "Camille?" she asked. "What's the biggest lesson you took from your time at Neural Track?" The room went still. I paused, then smiled gently. If you build something with your soul," I said, "protect it like your life depends on it, because it does." No mention of Griffin, no mention of my father, just the truth. After the press conference, I stood alone in the hallway outside. The air was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in years. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I didn't win by replacing them. I won by no longer needing their permission to lead. A month later, an unexpected message appeared in my inbox. From Russell Dorsey, subject, mentorship application. "Camille, I applied to join Nova as a volunteer mentor. I may have failed as your CEO, but if I can serve as your student, I will be proud." "Dad?" I stared at the words for a long time. There was no request for forgiveness, no attempt to rewrite what had been lost, just a sentence, a surrender. And strangely, that made it easier to breathe. I never wrote back, not because I held on to anger, but because some things, once broken, don't need to be rebuilt. They just need to be left behind, so we can walk forward unburdened. Because in the end, this story was never about taking back power. It was about realizing I'd always had it. If Camille's story spoke to something in you, about being underestimated, overlooked, or quietly erased, know this: you're not alone. You have the right to protect what you build, to walk away from what no longer sees your worth, and to rebuild on your own terms. Leave a comment below and tell us, what would you reclaim if no one stood in your way? Like this video if you believe in standing your ground. Share it with someone who's quietly building something powerful. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, strategy, and quiet victory. This was The Reclamation. And Camille? She's just getting started. I always thought birthdays were supposed to start with candles and end with champagne. Instead, mine began with a smirk across a glass desk. "Here's my surprise for you." "Rowena," drawled Adrian Mercer, the golden boy of the firm and heir to his father's empire. "You're fired, effective immediately." He said it like he was offering me a luxury handbag, not yanking away the career I had built brick by brick for 5 years. Behind him, someone had strung up a half-hearted banner that read "Happy 36th" in cheap gold foil. A plastic sheet cake sat untouched on the credenza, sweating under fluorescent lights. My birthday celebration. I suppose someone thought it would soften the blow, like sprinkles on poison. The beginning of the story can be a bit heavy, so remember to sit up straight or lie down to ease the tension. I'm curious where you're from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Little clicks make a big difference in keeping these stories coming to you. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. No screaming, no bargaining. I just stood there, my jaw locked, as he pretended to check his phone like a real executive. "Go ahead and pack your things. Security will revoke your access in 10 minutes. He smiled again. The kind of smile people practice in mirrors before job interviews, so I nodded once, as if he'd just reminded me of a dentist appointment. Then I turned on my heel and walked past Tasha, the receptionist, whose eyes widened like she couldn't decide if this was an office prank or a public execution. The elevator doors slid shut, catching my reflection in the steel. A woman in a navy blazer, lipstick still intact, hair unmoved. A woman who had just been discarded like expired stationery. And because fate has a taste for irony, it was my 36th birthday. This morning had been so different. Warm coffee brewed by Marcus, my husband, who sang off-key while our mutt barked along. He kissed my forehead and said, "Just get through work, Ro. The real birthday starts after." I thought he meant dinner reservations, or maybe a weekend getaway. Turns out, he meant something else entirely. when I finally slid behind the wheel of my car, my badge still dangling from the mirror. I called him. He answered on the first ring. "Happy birthday, love," he said. "What time should I pick you up?" "I'm already out," I replied, voice flat. "Adrian fired me." Silence. Then, a low exhale. Good. Good. That word hung in the air, sharp and unsettling. Marcus knew something, and as the anger burned under my skin, I realized so did I. Adrian Mercer had no idea what he had just unleashed. The drive home should have been filled with tears, or at least a touch of panic, but I felt neither. Instead, there was an eerie calm, like the quiet before a storm that everyone but the fool in the tower can see coming. Adrian thought he'd dealt me a fatal blow. All he really did was free me from the circus, where I was the unwilling clown. When I walked through the front door, Marcus was already waiting. He had traded his work shirt for something casual. Sleeves rolled up, 2 champagne flutes ready on the counter, as if he had been expecting this exact moment. I set my keys down, raising an eyebrow. "What's this supposed to be?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He lifted a glass and clinked it lightly against mine. "To endings," he said. Then, with a sly grin that made my pulse quicken, he added, "And to what happens 4 hours from now." I stared at him, incredulous. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, he kissed my cheek and murmured, "Just trust me." The bitterness I had been holding in all morning bubbled over into sarcasm. "Trust you? My boss's son just handed me a pink slip with frosting on the side, and you're toasting to it like it's our anniversary." Marcus didn't flinch. "Rowena, you were never safe in that place, and you knew it. You carried that company on your back while Adrian played CEO cosplay with his father's money. Today wasn't your loss. It was his mistake." I sank into a chair, champagne glass in hand, my reflection fractured in its golden fizz. He was right, though I hated admitting it. Adrian hadn't fired me to protect the company. He'd fired me to protect himself. And if Marcus was this calm, then maybe Adrian's smug little performance in that glass office was already unraveling. Hours later, the first phone call came, then another, and another. By the time my phone buzzed its 98th missed call, I realized Marcus hadn't been celebrating an ending. He'd been celebrating the start of something Adrian Mercer couldn't possibly control. The first real crack in Adrian Mercer's glass castle appeared not in a headline or a courtroom, but in my own living room, on Marcus's laptop. He closed it slowly, like a doctor about to deliver a terminal diagnosis, and slid it across the table toward me. "Rowena," he said carefully, "you need to see this." I braced myself. Maybe another humiliating email. Maybe Adrian's smug face splashed across some industry newsletter bragging about his strategic leadership, but it wasn't that. It was worse. On the screen glowed the Ridgepoint Estates development plans, a $22 million project I had practically mothered from conception. Except this wasn't my work. Not really. The layout was familiar. Yes, but entire safety features were gone. Reinforcement specs slashed, drainage solutions gutted. The perimeter wall I'd flagged as unstable quietly ignored. And at the bottom, clear as day, was my digital signature. My name, my credentials, my reputation, weaponized against me. I felt my lip curl, not in shock, but in contempt. "He actually thinks I'm this sloppy?" I muttered. "Cutting corners like a bargain bin contractor?" Marcus folded his arms. "It gets better. Look at the timestamp." I scrolled. There it was. Submitted 3 weeks ago. The same week I was sipping cocktails with my sister in Santa Fe. Nowhere near a computer. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a laugh that didn't sound like me. So Adrian forged my approval on a multi-million-dollar housing project. On my birthday. He fires me thinking I'll just disappear. while my name is sitting on a ticking time bomb of liability. Marcus's jaw tightened. Exactly. He didn't just fire you. Rowena, he tried to erase you as the one person who could stop him. And suddenly, it all clicked. The smug dismissal, the cheap cake, the hurried push to get me out the door. Adrian hadn't been delivering a surprise. He'd been covering his tracks. A paper-thin attempt at making me vanish before anyone thought to ask questions. I stared at the screen again, my fury sharpening into clarity. Ridgepoint Estates wasn't just flawed, it was dangerous. Families would live there. Children would play in backyards that might crumble if those walls failed. This wasn't business malpractice. It was criminal negligence, with my name plastered all over it. I shut the laptop gently, the way one closes a coffin. He's too stupid to realize what he's done, I said, and too arrogant to realize I'm not going quietly. Marcus's voice was low but steady. Then it's time to decide. Do you call them back, or let them keep sweating? I didn't answer right away. My phone lit up again. 15 missed calls, then 20, then 30. Office managers, department heads, even Adrian himself. Each one a silent confession of panic. For the first time that day. I smiled. It was sharp, bitter, and real. No, I said finally. Let them sweat. Adrian Mercer just gave me the best birthday gift of all, the rope he'll hang himself with. By the next morning, my phone looked like it had been possessed. 119 missed calls, a string of frantic voicemails from names I knew well, department heads who used to copy me on everything, the office manager who once begged me to fix Adrian's scheduling disasters, even Adrian himself, who apparently discovered what it feels like when daddy's money can't buy competence. I didn't call anyone back. Why would I? If there was one thing I'd learned in 5 years of propping up Everstone developments, it was that panic spreads faster than mold in a damp basement. And right now, their panic was my leverage. The last voicemail came from Susan Laird, the compliance officer. Her voice cracked with desperation. Rowena, I don't know what's happening, but the Ridgepoint system keeps rejecting our access. It keeps asking for the primary architect override. Adrian's losing it. Please, call me back. Please. I let the message play twice before deleting it. Then I typed a short reply, choosing my words with surgical precision. Speak to your legal team before contacting me again. This message will be saved. Cold, simple, unmistakable. The kind of text you don't argue with because you know it will surface later like a shark fin. Marcus watched me hit send and raised an eyebrow. That's it? That's it, I replied. If they want my voice, they can hear it in court. For the first time since yesterday's circus, in Adrian's glass office, I felt something other than bitterness. Control. Sweet, deliberate control. I slipped my laptop into my bag. I need a favor, I said. Marcus didn't even hesitate. Name it. I need someone who will actually listen. Someone higher up than the little kingdom Adrian thinks he's running, who handles compliance checks after permits are approved. He didn't miss a beat. My boss, Gina Montoya, Department of Urban Development. I allowed myself a thin smile. Perfect. Set it up. And just like that, the narrative shifted. I was no longer the discarded employee Adrian thought he could erase. I was a witness with evidence, a professional with receipts, and the only person standing between his forgery and a $22 million catastrophe, while Adrian paced his corner office, barking at assistants and blaming underlings. I sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee, watching the missed calls stack like chips in a casino. Every buzz of my phone reminded me of one thing. For the first time in years, they needed me more than I needed them. By noon, Marcus had confirmed the meeting. 2 hours from now, I'd be sitting across from Gina Montoya with a folder full of truth Adrian couldn't spin. I slid the folder into my bag and zipped it shut. Let them sweat, I muttered. They wanted me gone. Now they get to live with what's missing. And with that, I walked out the door, not to return to Everstone, but to aim higher, sharper, and deadlier than Adrian Mercer ever imagined. Do these new details surprise you? Do you think Rowena's silence is the calm before a bigger storm? Or will Adrian find a way to wriggle out of it? Stay with me until the very end. Because trust me, the finish to this story is something you won't want to miss. The conference room at the Department of Urban Development was nothing glamorous. 4 beige walls, a humming air vent, and a stack of legal pads that looked like they'd been waiting for someone to ruin a career. Gina Montoya, head of compliance, sat across from me, mid-50s, sharp eyes behind rimless glasses, the kind of woman who didn't waste words. I respected that immediately. I laid my folder on the table and opened it, one sheet at a time. These, I said, sliding forward the first set of plans, are my original Ridgepoint Estates blueprints, every code spec, every reinforcement, every safeguard. Then I placed the altered set next to them, Adrian's masterpiece of shortcuts. And these are the versions your office received. Gina barely glanced up. Her pen moved quickly, circling discrepancies like she'd been expecting something rotten. I continued, my tone dry enough to cut glass. Notice the missing retaining wall specifications? The reduced slab depth? He shaved costs like trimming fat off a steak, except this steak happens to hold people's lives. Marcus had been right. Gina didn't need convincing. She needed evidence, and I had brought it in spades. Finally, I dropped the trump card, a printout of the timestamp logs. This file was submitted while I was on vacation, Santa Fe. I have flight records to prove it. Whoever logged in under my credentials forged it. For a long moment, the only sound was the scratching of her pen. Then she set it down, folded her hands, and looked at me squarely. Rowena, what you've shown me isn't just unethical, it's criminal. If those homes had been built to this spec, people could have died. I leaned back, arms crossed. But I'd have taken the blame. My name, my license, my signature. That's the gift Adrian thought he was giving me on my birthday. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of disgust. I'm flagging the Ridgepoint permit for emergency review. Construction is frozen effective immediately, and you... She paused, tilting her head. You need legal representation, fast. If your signature was forged, you're not liable, but optics matter. Right now, your name is all over this mess. I gave a bitter laugh. Story of my life. As I gathered my papers, Gina tapped the red-inked pages with one finger. Rowena, Everstone is about to learn that compliance isn't a suggestion, it's the law. And you're holding the receipts. Walking out of that building, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. Adrian wanted me erased, but instead, he'd written me into the center of a scandal big enough to topple him. And the best part? He still didn't know the clock had already started ticking. The voicemail landed like a stone in water, short ripples, but heavy enough to sink. The name on the screen read Gregory Mercer, the founder, the man who built Everstone with grit and blueprints before his son turned it into a playground for arrogance. Rowena, his voice rasped, weakened from the stroke that had pulled him out of the boardroom. I heard what happened. Can we meet? I nearly deleted it. The last thing I needed was a Mercer telling me how unfortunate things looked. But curiosity is a cruel master, and part of me wanted to hear whether Gregory's apology would sound like remorse or damage control. We met that afternoon in a cafe far from downtown, the kind of place where anonymity came free with burnt coffee. He looked older, thinner, regret hanging on him like an ill-fitted suit. When he saw me, his expression cracked with something between guilt and relief. I built that company for 30 years, he began. No small talk, no pleasantries. And my son unraveled it in less than one. I thought he needed guidance. What he needed was a leash. I sipped my coffee, bitter as the moment. And yet you handed him the keys. His eyes fell. I know, and I'm sorry. Susan told me what he did. He's denying it. Of course, claims you sabotaged the files. I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. Classic Adrian. Destroy the evidence, then point at the woman holding the ashes. Gregory leaned forward, voice low. Rowena, if you push this legally, Everstone will collapse. You know that. I met his gaze without blinking. That's not my problem. He swallowed, hesitated. What if I offered you something else? There it was. The Mercer family instinct. Trade power for silence. Dangle influence like a carrot. I raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Before he could elaborate, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I didn't need to check the ID to know who it was. Adrian. I played it on speaker. Rowena, look, maybe we can fix this. I didn't mean for it to go this way. We'll undo the termination. Call it a miscommunication. I actually laughed. Miscommunication, as if firing me on my birthday, forging my signature, and nearly approving a death trap for families was a typo in an email. I ended the call without replying and slid the phone back across the table. They're scared, I told Gregory, and they should be. He nodded slowly, eyes clouded with shame. You're right, they need you, but not as an employee, as something else. For the first time since Adrian's smug little performance, I saw a glimmer of what Everstone had once been under Gregory's watch, serious, sober, aware of consequences. But I wasn't ready to give him answers. Not yet. Let them twist in the wind a little longer. They thought I was expendable. Now they were learning what it feels like to choke on their own arrogance. The thing about rot is that it never stays hidden. One crack in the wall, and suddenly the whole house smells. Ridgepoint Estates was only the first whiff. Marcus knew it. I knew it. And by the time we spread the files across our kitchen table, the pattern was undeniable. Marcus had spent half the night combing through public records, cross-checking permits, submissions, and digital sign-offs. He slid a fresh stack toward me. Look at this one. The Silver Pine condos. I skimmed the plans, my jaw tightening. Same story. Safety redundancies stripped, material grades downgraded, and my colleague Elaine Carter's signature at the bottom, perfect. Except Elaine had left the company last year. I let out a humorless laugh. So he's resurrecting ghosts now. Charming. Marcus didn't smile. That's not the only one. Harbor Heights, Willow Creek, 6 projects in total. Everyone has a forged name attached. Yours, Elaine's, even Tom Adler's, and Tom retired 2 summers ago. I leaned back, pressing my palms against my eyes. The rage wasn't fiery anymore. It was cold, clinical, the kind of fury that settles in and refuses to leave. This isn't sloppiness. It's a system. Adrian's turned forgery into his project management style. The words tasted bitter. I had spent years building Everstone's reputation as a firm that could be trusted with family homes, schools, entire neighborhoods. And in less than 12 months, Adrian had gutted it like a fish for a quick profit. Marcus tapped the table. You can't just fight him on Ridgepoint. That makes it look personal. You need to show this is bigger, systemic. Otherwise, he'll paint you as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. I exhaled slowly. The irony not lost on me. Disgruntled? He fired me on my birthday under a banner and a stale cake. If I'm not disgruntled, then who is? But Marcus was right. 1 project could be dismissed as a mistake. 6 couldn't. I spread the documents out like crime scene photos, red pen in hand, circling the discrepancies one by one. Cutting rebar thickness by half, eliminating fireproofing measures, swapping concrete mix ratios. He's not just saving pennies, he's gambling lives. The silence in the room grew heavy. Even the dogs stayed curled at our feet, as if they sensed the weight of what we were uncovering. Finally, I looked up. This goes beyond the city's compliance office. We need the state licensing board, the ethics committee, anyone who still remembers what integrity is supposed to mean. Marcus nodded. Then that's where we take it. I stacked the files neatly. The way I used to prepare project proposals. Only this time, I wasn't trying to win a contract. I was preparing an indictment. Ridgepoint had been the first domino, but now I could see the whole line, stretching back months, and when it fell, Adrian Mercer wouldn't just lose his grip on Everstone, he'd lose the illusion that he ever belonged in charge. Truth has a nasty habit of leaking. You can lock doors, shred files, fire people, but the truth always finds a crack to crawl through. By Thursday morning, it had crawled straight into the headlines. The first article was on a local development blog. Whistleblower flags major safety concerns in 22 Maller's Ridgepoint project. No name, just an insider. But the documents? Those were mine. The phrasing, the details, the diagrams. I could recognize my own work even when stripped of my name. Within hours, larger outlets picked it up. By noon, city council members were issuing statements of grave concern. The mayor's office requested an emergency briefing, and somewhere in his glass palace, Adrian Mercer was probably throwing his phone against a wall, blaming interns for the fact that his empire was crumbling in public view. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something sharper, cleaner, clarity. This wasn't about me getting fired anymore. This was about making sure Ridgepoint, and every other project Adrian had butchered, never became someone's coffin. That night, while the media storm grew, Marcus found me at the kitchen table, flipping through my old grad school binder. Inside were sketches, flowcharts, half-finished notes for a system I once dreamed of building, a tool to track compliance, flag inconsistencies, and create a backup approval trail that couldn't be forged. I traced a finger over the faded pencil lines. You know what the real joke is? If this system had existed, Adrian couldn't have gotten away with any of it. Marcus leaned against the doorway. So build it. Don't just expose what he's done. Replace it. And there it was. The spark. I wasn't just the woman Adrian fired on her birthday anymore. I was the one who could create the solution that his arrogance had proven the world desperately needed. 2 days later, I registered my company, Proofline Project Systems. The name felt right. Clean, sharp, unforgiving. Within 48 hours, the first consultation request came in, not from Everstone. Of course, they were still scrambling to put out fires, but from one of their largest competitors. Then another. Then 2 more. Quieter this time. Firms that didn't want their names in the headlines, but wanted my system before their own skeletons came rattling out of the closet. Meanwhile, Everstone was eating itself alive. Employees were jumping ship. Clients were hesitating. And through it all, Adrian's voice was nowhere to be heard, except in the occasional leaked email full of excuses and finger-pointing. The invitation arrived not in flowers, not in apologies, but in a sterile email with the subject line, Proposal for Discussion. Everstone's board wanted me back, not as an employee, not as a planner, but as something else entirely. I almost deleted it. After all, I had my own company now, contracts in motion, competitors quietly lining up at my door. Why crawl back into the pit Adrian had poisoned? But the wording intrigued me. Full autonomy, independent oversight, report directly to the board. Translation, they were desperate, so I agreed to a meeting, but on my terms. Neutral ground. A downtown conference space where the carpet still smelled of disinfectant. Marcus came with me, not as my husband this time, but as the only person I trusted to watch the room. Gregory was there, looking older but steadier than when I last saw him. 2 board members flanked him, stiff as mannequins, and across from them sat a corporate attorney whose expression screamed, damage control at all costs. Noticeably absent. Adrian. Where is he? I asked flatly, sliding into my chair. Gregory cleared his throat. Removed from daily operations. He's on indefinite leave pending the ethics investigation. I nodded once, unsurprised. The golden boy had finally been sent to his room. They laid out their offer. I would design and oversee an entirely new integrity system. I'd have access to every file, every permit, every blueprint. No project could move forward without my approval. It was more power than I'd ever held inside Everstone, and they knew it. I leaned back, letting them sweat a little. "And if you object to one of my flags?" The attorney shifted. "We'd review." "No," I cut him off. "If I say a project stops, it stops. Non-negotiable." The silence that followed was glorious. Gregory finally broke it. "Done?" I smiled thinly. "Good. Then one more condition." The board members stiffened. The attorney's pen froze. I let the pause stretch, savoring the moment. "Adrian completes full retraining under me. Every module I assign, every lesson I decide. He doesn't touch another project until I sign off." Their shock was almost comical. One of the board members sputtered. "You want to supervise him?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I want to educate him. If he stays in this industry, he'll learn to do it right, or not at all." Gregory's gaze lingered on me, heavy with something like relief. Finally, he nodded. Agreed. I walked out of that room with a signed contract in hand. Not a return to Everstone, but a rewriting of the power dynamic. They couldn't fire me. They couldn't silence me. They couldn't ignore me. And Adrian Mercer, the man who fired me on my birthday, was now my student. That, I thought, was the sweetest birthday gift of all. The Ridgepoint Town Hall wasn't a stage for redemption. Fluorescent lights buzzed, folding chairs groaned under restless bodies, and burnt coffee lingered untouched on a side table. Less summit, more community therapy session. Fitting. Really. I arrived early, contract folder in hand. Not out of need, but because Gregory Mercer's face always soured at the sight of his empire reduced to papers I controlled. The gymnasium filled quickly, residents with worry etched deep, council members whispering, reporters practically salivating for scandal. At 7:02, Gregory began with theatrics. "Tonight is about transparency," he said, hands folded like prayer might help. "About rebuilding trust." Then he gestured toward me. "That begins with introducing the person leading the integrity overhaul, Rowena Chase." I rose, adjusted my blazer, heels striking the linoleum like punctuation. The murmurs hushed. "Good evening," I said, steady, too calm. "Some of you know my name from recent reports. I spent 5 years as a senior planner at Everstone. Last month, I discovered my signature had been forged on Ridgepoint Estates." Gasps rippled. Someone muttered, "I knew it." I didn't blink. After I reported it, the city froze the permit. Investigators confirmed multiple violations. If those plans had gone forward, this neighborhood wouldn't be safe. It would be a liability. A woman in the second row raised her hand, voice trembling. "Why should we trust Everstone again?" I nodded. "You shouldn't trust blindly. You should verify. That's why we built a public dashboard. Every inspection, every revision, visible to you. Not whispered behind boardroom glass, but in writing, accessible anytime." Murmurs again. Less fury, more curiosity. Then came the moment no one expected. A man stood, blue shirt, sleeves rolled, folder in hand. Adrian Mercer, for once. No tailored armor, no smug grin. Just a man stripped bare. "May I speak?" he asked. Gregory froze. I gestured. "Go ahead." Adrian walked slowly, clearing his throat. "I'm Adrian Mercer, acting director of Everstone. Many of you knew my father, who built this company with integrity. I did not honor that." Silence. He gripped the mic. "I altered submissions. I cut corners. I forged signatures. I thought I could control the fallout. I was wrong." The gym fell into a silence heavy enough to bend steel. He lowered his gaze. For 6 weeks, I've been retraining under Ms. Chase, not by board order, by choice. If this project ever means something again, it starts with accountability. It starts with me admitting I failed. No applause, no jeers, just silence. Afterward, an older man approached me, calloused hands, quiet voice. If you're fixing this, I'll sleep tonight. That meant more than any title ever had, walking out beneath the buzzing lights. I realized revenge isn't always fire. Sometimes it's rebuilding. Sometimes it's forcing the people who dismissed you to learn from you. Sometimes it's standing calm at a microphone while the man who once smirked at your firing admits his empire only survives because you refuse to vanish. And that, I thought, is the kind of birthday gift you never return. If you've followed me this far, thank you. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like if you feel her power. Share this with those who have been underrated. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more great stories about justice,